I'm going to give you some logistical information. First of all, the hashtag for today's conference is NYSCATE DW16. So the workshop leaders will have that kind of information for you, but again, it's NYSCATE DW16. I want to thank Erie 1 BOCES, Erie 2 ON, and CA BOCES for all working together on the conference committee for many, many years, as Amy mentioned, to bring this event together. And all of the exhibitors who are working with us, they are all exhibiting next door. So if you walk across the hall, they'll be there all day. They are also located in your flyer. So everyone's flyer is in your folder. You also have an evaluation form in your folder, and attached to that evaluation form is a ticket. We already have your tickets, so that's yours to keep, and you have to be present to win at the end of the day. So your schedule is inside your flyer. These are the B rooms. What will actually happen if you haven't been here before, those doors will close after the keynote, and this will be separated into 2 different rooms. And then all of the other sessions will be up the hallway, and those are all in A rooms or in the tech labs. So the tech labs, you have to just kind of keep going further down the hall to get to those tech labs. Restrooms are out the door here to the left. There's exits in the back of the room, in the front of the room. And then everyone always asks about lunch, so I'll let you know how that's going to happen. Lunch is up by the cafe. There are tables set up, and we'll have the lunches there for you. So you need to think about what you ordered. So it was a ham wrap, a tuna wrap, a turkey wrap, or a Caesar salad. So whatever you signed up for, that's the box lunch that you pick up. You can go eat in any of the rooms, the A rooms or these rooms down here. But you also have time to visit the exhibit area during that time. Or if it's nice enough, you can eat outside. We have picnic tables outside as well. And those are down the B room hallway. Or if you walk out this door and kind of walk around, you'll see all the picnic tables back there. So if it's nice enough, please feel free to eat outside as well. The door prizes have been donated by all of our exhibitors. So again, you must be present to win, and you have that ticket in your folder. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Karen Cuddy-Miller to introduce Dr. Wiley.
Thank you. Well, thank you. It is a tremendous pleasure to have the opportunity to welcome Dr. Brandon Wiley back to Western New York. Many of you may be familiar with Brandon's educational career here, obtaining his initial degrees through the State University of New York at Fredonia, and moving through his career as a teacher, staff development director, and went into district administration. He's also obtained his doctorate in educational and organizational leadership through the University of Pennsylvania. After doing some of his professional work here, including the director of staff development and assistant superintendent at the West Seneca Central School District several years ago, he was given the opportunity to move on to bigger and better things. He moved to the New York City area, and he began to work with the Asia Society International Studies Network. In that area, he had the opportunity to work with his team to provide strategic support to districts and school leadership around global competence, mastery-based learning, new school development, and promotion of deeper learning. He has traveled worldwide in that endeavor. He has also served as the senior director of the school development in Spring Point, a New York-based organization that focused on helping urban school districts develop mastery-based high schools that personalize learning for every student and redefine the typical high school experience for those students. Brandon served as the director of staff development. As I mentioned, I sat with him as he's moved forward, as well as curriculum instruction knowledge. Currently, Brandon is the president of Global Ed Leader, the educational consulting firm that works with schools, districts, and educational organizations around the world. He relocated to Denver, Colorado recently. Having led a range of districts and state and national education initiatives, he specializes in strategic planning, program development, system-wide innovation, leadership development, and the promotion of global competence for adults and for students. In April, he was appointed to the Buck Institute for Education, the leading expert in project-based learning, as their interim senior director of programs. He is going to be an exciting keynote speaker, and at this time, I'd like to welcome him to us.
So can you hear me? Can you hear me okay? Mm-hmm. So Karen asked me, what should I say this morning? I said, set the bar low. Karen, thank you for that. I appreciate it. Hi, everyone. Happy Monday. Thank you for bringing the nice weather. I appreciate that. This is nice compared to Denver. We were 72 degrees when I left, and they're going to get about 6 inches of snow today. That's what happens. It is really an honor for me to be here today and to share this time this morning with you. And my hope is that I can sort of push our collective thinking a little bit in a variety of areas. As Karen very generously shared this morning, I've been very blessed in my career, have a lot of different experiences, rooted here in Western New York to begin, and now as I'm doing work around the United States and internationally, I keep coming back home to where it all began. So I just want to share, this weekend I had an opportunity to be with family for Mother's Day, as you can imagine, and we were kind of reflecting on sort of what I was here to do, to talk about today. And what I realized is, so just a little bit more about myself. First of all, 2 things that I want to start with today. One is a disclaimer and one is a pinky promise to you. So the disclaimer is I'm not an expert in anything, right? So if you came here to hear expertise, you're not going to get it. What you're going to get is a practitioner who's working through this stuff with you, like you, trying to figure out what we can do to do more for our kids wherever they are. So that's my first thing is you're not going to hear an expert today. You're going to hear someone who's sharing some ideas, some strategies, some stories from my travels. The second thing, my pinky promise is you're not going to listen to me talk for an hour. So this is going to be an interactive keynote. So if you don't like the person sitting next to you, I'm sorry. Okay. So a couple things. First of all, again, it's great to be home. Just a little bit about myself. First of all, I started off. I was a Hamburg bulldog, right? So that's how I started. Fight, fight, fight. And so then my teaching career, I went to Lake Shore, right? And so I spent my teaching career teaching elementary and middle school at Lake Shore Central. And then I went to West Seneca, where most of my administrative experience came from here in Western New York. But I also had a short stint here at Erie One BOCES. For almost a year, I was a staff development coordinator here at Erie One BOCES, which afforded me the opportunity to work with a lot of other school districts. So when I say it's good to be home, I really mean it. Okay, and if your district isn't up here, why not? No, just kidding. There's still time. Okay, so the good news is, like really coming home today, I feel like I really understand some of the realities of what you're dealing with. And it's been fun for me to sort of step out of Western New York a little bit, now to come back to talk to you about what this would mean for our kids here. So a few other things. So this is me in kindergarten. So I told you yesterday we were a family, so we were kind of reminiscing on a few things. And so we were just talking about school and what schooling did for me as an adult and what I can remember. So we were kind of telling stories about this. So what I can remember from a very young age is I had this sort of curiosity to want to know more about not just the world, but just the things around me, how they worked, why they worked, and what it would mean for me. So this is me in first grade. Okay, I had to get glasses in first grade, and so you can imagine this is very devastating to me in first grade. Now wait, some of you look kind of puzzled right now. Where have you seen this shirt? So I said to my mom yesterday, Mom, could we not have dressed me a little bit differently? She said, Brandon, it was your favorite shirt. You wouldn't wear anything else, right? Yes. So the funny thing is, when I was in first grade, I had this great teacher, Mrs. Brush. And Mrs. Brush was always kind of pushing us again to kind of know more about the world, get into the community. One of my classmates found a kitten on her way to school, picked it up, brought it in, and she thought it was lost. Well, this Brush taught that, turned that into a learning opportunity. So we went around to the community trying to find out who owned this kitten. Well, anyways, we also did a lot of writing in first grade. So I want to share this is a piece. Now, my mom is amazing, as I'm sure all your moms are amazing. But my mom is really amazing because she kept a scrapbook for us of a lot of things that we did when we were younger. So for those in the back, let me read this to you. This is a story I wrote in first grade. And it says, the way we might live in 2000. Right? You remember 2000 was like so far off? Okay, I know some of you guys here are like probably 22 in here right now, so maybe let's reset that. 2000 was a big deal, guys. Okay, so what it says is in 2000 we might live in space or underground or live in the water. A lot of things will be different. We might even have cars that go on a wire, or a boat that can fly, or maybe a spaceship that can hold 50 people. Wait, I wasn't done. In the year 2000, maybe nothing will change. For Mom in 2000, for Mother's Day, maybe you can get her a robot so she does not have to do everything. The robot can do it for her when she is tired. In the year 2000, I might be a spaceship fixer. Now, I must admit, I'm a few credits short of being a spaceship fixer, okay? But I think what I want to share with this story not only is, by the way, happy Mother's Day, a day late for those of you who have children and are moms, and those of us who want to be moms. But, so for me, Mrs. Rush, one of the things that she really did is she started to kind of like, again, help me understand why the world mattered. And for me, this idea of science, technology, math actually was very interesting. It wasn't always easy for me, but it was something that was interesting to me, even at a young age. Now, I'll just do this really quickly because, I did grow up a little bit. It's me in 6th grade. And I always share these just because I wanted to embarrass myself, actually, as much as I could. So in 6th grade, my 6th grade teacher was Mr. Anderson, and this is the first time that I ever remember being in front of a group of people to give a talk. There were 6 of us that were selected to speak in front of our school board, and so we did a presentation in front of our school board. And that's the first time that I realized that I had some power as an individual, that I had the ability as an individual to actually do something that can make a difference for our community, right? And so I share that story with you because I think it's really critical as we talk about this world that we're creating, we're living in. How are we creating meaningful, relevant opportunities for our kids? How do we connect them to the world that's around them? And then, I had the terrible experience in high school of acne. You can laugh, it's okay. I laugh at it now, but I didn't at the time, right? And luckily, there's actually a few of my classmates I went to high school with in the audience today. Do you guys remember this guy, maybe? A little bit? Yeah. Yeah, that's right. You didn't talk to me in high school. No. Not these guys. Just kidding. Right? All right. And so then this is my first year teaching. And so I have a few of my former colleagues that I used to teach with. This is my first year teaching. Look how happy I was. What the hell was I thinking? 3rd grade. Right? I was so happy. I think I was so happy to finally get a paycheck, right? That was as measly as it might have been. Well, and I'm sharing these stories because the important thing that I want to kind of connect with you today is that every one of you has a story, right? And today we're going to do an activity actually during the keynote where you're going to get a chance to kind of tell your story. I think what's important is that as we think about this work that we're doing, we keep the kids at the center of the work, right? And we realize that we're helping them tell their story and write their story every day. So let me kind of jump in. So there's a couple things that I've noticed as I'm traveling around the country and certainly around the world, that there are some challenges that we face inherent in the jobs that we do as teachers and as administrators. One is that increasingly in this country, we still have an achievement gap that we're having a difficult time overcoming. Most of the work that I'm doing now is in urban education. So I'm working in big cities like Cleveland and LA, El Paso, Texas, Denver, Houston, New York City, right? Where the realities are very different in many cases than the realities we face here in Western New York, right? They're magnified if nothing else. Right, so things like this achievement gap, particularly for kids who have been underrepresented and underserved for many years, kids that have not had access to quality education, this is still a challenge that we face as a country. The second one, though, is that we still have this opportunity gap, right? So in other words, not all of our kids have access, to the same opportunities in this country, right? So a lot of my work in the last probably 6 or 7 years has really been around this issue of equity. How are we creating equitable, high-quality education opportunities for all kids? Not that they're all going to take those pathways, but we want to be able to create those pathways and not have them as limiters. Unfortunately, still in this country, we have too many places where kids' futures are determined by the zip code in which they're born, right? And so if you think about the challenges that your students face, the challenges that they have at home, whether it's because of poverty, because of issues with their family, because of learning disabilities, whatever the challenges are that face them, how do we as a school and a community respond to that? But I would say that there is a new third gap, and this is something I've been talking a lot about in a lot of places, and we're going to kind of trace this through the talk this morning. And I think the third new gap is the trust gap. You are not trusted as educators anymore. As teachers, you are not trusted, and in many cases, administrators, you are not trusted. And what is my evidence? My evidence is policy that is actually more about control about uniformity, about trying to dictate to you how you're going to teach your kids, and not about what it is our kids actually need to be prepared for the world, right? If you look globally right now, the pendulums are very severely switching. So in many countries, particularly in many Asian countries, where testing and top-down bureaucracy has been the rule of the day, it's actually moving in the other direction, where they're trying to build in more autonomy at the school level, where they're trying to value teachers as professionals, and there's actually a decrease in testing. And yet in the United States, we're going in the opposite direction. More standardization, more testing, more accountability. So it's an interesting, makes you kind of go, about where are we as a nation when it comes to teaching and learning, and about whether or not you as educators are trusted to handle what it is that we want to be able to do with kids. So to kind of move us forward then, because I don't want to be all doom and gloom, any kindergarten teachers in the room? All right, God bless you, you are saints. So when I was at Lake Shore, I was teaching 3rd grade. I would go down to the kindergarten rooms, get the kids whipped up, and I'd go back to my room. And so this year's incoming kindergartners are the class of 2028. Okay, I want that to set in for a second. So my question to you is, what is your school and your district doing to prepare these kids for their future? Right, because even if I am a high school teacher and I won't see these kids, I did this presentation the other day and I shared this, and a woman in the audience raised her hand. I said, yes. She said, I'll be dead. Wow, okay, well, for the rest of you then, what are we doing to prepare kids for the world, right? And so we don't know a lot about what the world is going to look like in 2028. And particularly in this year's political climate, I'm really not sure what the world's going to look like in 2028. But there are some things that we do know. And so my question you to kind of be thinking about is, how are we responsive as schools and districts to prepare our kids for 2028? You see, in most schools in the United States, we have a short view of what we're doing with kids. We're thinking about next year, or maybe yet 3 years, right? How many of you have a 3-year strategic plan or a 5-year strategic plan? Okay, that's good. There are a lot of places that don't have a plan. We just make shit up as we go along. Pardon my French. Okay? But what I'm pushing for is that we're thinking even longer term, right? How are we starting to orient ourselves to the way things are going to be when kids graduate in 2028? So here's a few things that we do know. First of all, the world is going to be more global, not less. Right? I don't know if any of you would remember this, but when the internet came out, there were a lot of people who said, oh, this is a fad. This will go away. Well, how's that going? Right? I feel the same way about global, right? Our world is not going to be less global. It's going to be more global as kids get older. Right? So the question is, what are we doing to prepare kids and to expose them to a world that's different than theirs? Many of your kids are going to stay here in Western New York, and God, I sure hope they do. What a great place to live. And there's a lot of times I come back and I wonder why I ever left. But the reality is, they're going to, even if they stay here, they're going to be interacting and working with people from different countries. Many of the jobs and careers they're going to have are going to expose them to different cultures, and many of them will be doing business in places outside of Western New York. So the question is, what are we doing then in our schools to prepare them for this? The second thing we know is that our communities are going to be inherently more diverse than they are today. And many of you are intimately feeling this right now, I know. In a lot of places where I go, I'll give you one example, in Portland, Maine. Right, anybody ever been to Portland, Maine? Okay. Now you might say, oh, well, Maine, how quaint. It's like I'm gonna go get some lobster, right? Okay, Portland, Maine is one of the most diverse cities in the United States. It's actually a resettlement city. It's where many folks who come from other countries, one of the first places that some of them settle are in Portland. Now, that has changed the demographics of that community so substantially, but when you go into those schools, you see a mostly Caucasian teaching staff, people who grew up in the community and don't really understand some of the diversity that's coming before them. Now, I don't share that to be down on them. I share it because as a community now, they've had to say, what are we going to do to be more responsive to an ever-changing population of students that we have? The other thing that's related to this is that increasingly, how many of you have ever been outside of the United States or ever worked with kids from outside of the United States? How many languages do kids from outside of the United States typically speak? Any idea? Right? 3, 4 language. How about our kids? Maybe English well. Some days. Before lunch, right? So part of this is also how are we preparing kids to be able to communicate effectively, and that means being fluent in more than one language. And yet, again, back to our policy stance in this country, what is one of the first areas to get cut when we have budget issues? Things like world languages, right? And so our priorities are a little bit out of whack when you really think about this. But we do know that our communities are going to be continually more diverse. We'll get to that in a second. The other thing we know is this idea of innovation. It's more important, it's less important to know stuff than it is to know what to do with the stuff. Right? So I can pick up my phone right now. I can take up my phone and I can take up my phone and I can find out just about any bit of information that I need, right, at a fingertip. What's more important for me is to figure out whether or not that information is reliable, whether or not it is sufficient to answer the questions I'm researching, right, and to be able to think ethically about that information that I'm consuming. Right? That's very different than being able to just know stuff. And yet again, we continue to have a system in this country that is very fixed on fixed knowledge. What do you know? Right? But what we're starting to see across the country is a shift towards how can you perform, how can you share information in purposeful ways, right? Whether it's through performance tasks or other real world learning. So we're going to talk about this. I'm also going to make the case this morning that we should ban the word innovation from schools. Okay, and I'll get to that in a second. It's horseshit. Pardon my French. I'm swearing, I've already sworn twice this morning. That's how passionate I am about this. It's crap. I'm going to tell you in a minute why I think it's crap. All right, we'll get there. It's a little teaser here. Okay, it's STEM, right? That's why we're here, right? So the other day I met a guy who is designing his school. He was very excited. And he said, you know, we were going around the room, everyone was describing what they're doing. He said, I'm designing a new school. It's going to be a STREAM school. And at first, you know, my face probably gave it away. I think, a STREAM, like I've heard of STEM, I've heard of STEAM, STREAM, that's a new one for me. And so I waited, I'm trying to figure out, what does the R stand for? And so I finally just had to ask him. I said, I'm sorry, STREAM, I don't get it. At first I thought it was like a fishing school. I wasn't sure, you know. And so he says, well, you know, we were worried that if we really focused too much on science, technology, math, that we would lose some of the essence of the humanities. I was like, okay. So that's kind of why sometimes people put the A in for arts, right? Let's bring in the arts. So what does the R stand for? Rhetoric. Rhetoric, interesting. So I said, well, why? What is rhetoric about? He says, well, we want kids to be able to read literature. We want them to be able to talk about literature. We want them to be able to write. And so we think rhetoric is important. And so I'm thinking to myself, science, technology, math, art, rhetoric. I'm like, he's designing a school. Like any school I've ever been to. I didn't tell him that, right? So, but what we do know, though, is that in the future, in 2028, there is going to be an increasing demand, and there already is now, for students who have a disposition in science, technology, engineering, and math. Increasingly so. And actually, a recent poll that was done by Gallup shows that many of the students who are entering college, what field do you think they're actually going into? Any ideas? Call it out. What do you think that they're, at least matriculating with their majors will be in? Political science. God help them. Sorry? Philosophy, close. Psychology, get in there. Still another number one.
Humanities.
So humanities, communications in particular. Okay, so if we think about this now, if we know where the jobs are going in the areas of science, technology, engineering, and math, and there is like a clear demand nationwide and abroad for these skill sets, and yet many of our students are still going into humanities. Now, I'm not saying that to say that we should just stop everything we're doing and just teach science, technology, and math, especially as a former social studies teacher. But what I am saying to you is that we have to be responsive to the types of skill sets that the job market is demanding and think about how we're weaving them into our curriculum. So today's focus, thinking about STEM, isn't just about, you know, let's add some cool tools to the classroom, right? It's like, how do we teach the specific skills that kids are going to need in this global workforce, right? And so there is not only a way to make learning more engaging through STEM, but I would argue it's also in response to the types of learning and the types of skill sets they'll need in the future. So the last thing that I want to share that I think we know is that kids will be living in a world of diminishing resources, right? How many of you have been told anytime recently that you need to do more with less? Anybody? Come on, you work in public education, right? So the reality is that is only going to continue to accelerate. Whether it's financial resources, whether it's natural resources, human capital resources, we are increasingly being asked to do more with less. Right? So the question that we need to help kids understand is, how do we do more with less? How do we conserve? How do we use the resources that are available to us to be able to make that difference or be able to achieve the goals that are put in front of us? All right, so 3 things to think about, and this is sort of my big idea for today. Three takeaways I'm hoping you'll have for today. Number 1 is that I do think we need to ditch the word innovation in schools. And I'll go into a little bit of depth on that, and I won't swear, I promise. But I just think this is a stupid word that means very little in most places, and it's the excuse we use for actually continuing to do the same things we've always been doing, but just with a different flavor or a different label. The second thing that I want to kind of think about is, how are we globalizing our schools? In other words, how are we making the experiences for both our teachers and students more connected to the world around them? And in particular, how are we bringing relevance, authenticity, and purpose to the learning? Okay? I'm going to actually do an activity in a second to help us with this. And then lastly, this idea of personalizing the learning. The idea that students actually own their learning and they have some say in what that learning looks like and how they're going to demonstrate that learning. And the underlying message of all 3 of these is that we have to be thinking about how technology can enable these 3 things. So what I'd like you to do is to take a minute and turn to a partner. First of all, maybe we'll take a minute of just think time, and then you can turn to a partner. And I want you to think about one of the most memorable learning experiences you've ever had in your life. It could be from your elementary school, secondary, wherever you would like to go back to. Okay, and I want you to think about, what was that one moment, that one instance that you thought was so powerful that as an adult sitting here today, it still sticks with you. Okay, so think about that for a minute, and then I want you to turn to a partner and talk about it. Just share, what was that experience? What did you learn? Why does it stand out to you? And just kind of reflect on that. Okay, go ahead.
Mine was when we go to Rube Goldberg. Wait a minute
That
here.
was sneaky.
No, it was building a Rube Goldberg machine. How about you?
What was the question?
Yes. Think back to a learning experience that you had in school that really impacted you. What was that experience?
Computer class, programming, basic.
Please take one more minute, 1 minute.
I recognized how a teacher with simple tools created a concept of geographic geometry and shows representation, which made it very easy to know and understand. Sadly, part of the reason she was very largely pregnant, so she did a lot of time just sitting and holding up a ruler on the side of the slide. It was still functional. So I think that was okay. I'm all around. I'm also intrigued by how much his younger pictures look a lot like him.
Oh, really? Yeah, well,
The shape of the face is
a little bit. So you can probably pause it, but we'll keep rolling.
Clap once if you can hear me. Clap twice if you can hear me. Clap 3 times if you can hear me. Thank you. All right, I'm gonna, well, this is what it looks like back here. Wow. Ooh. All right, so did you find that you had anything in common with the person you were talking with? Anyone? Yes? No? Yeah? What were some of the things that you found that you had in common? Anybody can kind of share out. One thing that stood out between, yes, thank you. Okay, so the time period was, and that's, that's pretty significant, right? That early learning experience has stayed with you as an adult today. Okay, what was it about the experience? Was there something about the experience that made it stay with you? Yeah. Life, right? Yeah, okay. So that was a very purposeful, kind of real world experience, right? Learning. What else? What else did you have in common? Thank you.
We both had an emotional connection to our learning and felt pride in what we had done.
Yeah, great. So there's an emotional connection that you stayed with you till today.
The connection was less about the content and more about how the teacher changed and presented it to you, and that they cared about you more so than necessarily the content.
How many of you, the relationship was part of what you shared, whether it was with other students or with your teacher? Good. Okay, how about one more? Something else. What else stood out to you about why it was such a memorable learning experience? Anybody? Go ahead, thanks.
A teacher calling you out on not working with your
Ah, okay.
moment for you to say, okay.
Great. So still kind of relational based, but in a different way, right? To kind of push you to set a higher expectation for yourself. Anyone else? Go ahead.
I thought the point of the activity we were working on was something else, and then at the end, the teacher kind of twisted it and said, aha, you thought it was this, but it's really this, and it's like a big eye-opening.
So a little dissonance, right?
Yeah.
A little disconnect. Good. Did anybody talk about anything being scripted? How about timed? Were any of your experience timed? Were you ranked? No? No kidding. Oh, well, let me just let that sit there for a second. Yeah, I mean, the reality is this, guys. We know this, right? That many of the conditions under which we're working in, right, with testing, with accountability, with the sort of top-down, is not creating the conditions for us to create the learning experiences that we know make a difference for kids, right? And so we've got to figure out a way, how do we work within the system, whether we can change the rules or not? And so, and I wasn't going to talk about this, but I feel like I really have to, since we are in the hotbed of opt-out country here. So, a lot of my friends ask me, what do you think about all the testing opt-out? And I have, to this day, never made a statement. Today I'm going to. And you can tweet this if you like. So the reality is this, again, when you look across this country and you look across the world, right, and how we hold kids accountable, how we hold teachers accountable, New York State in particular has really got it half-assed backwards. In most places where Common Core has been implemented, there's been really thoughtful conversations about what implementation looks like. There's not a teacher in this room who is afraid of higher standards, not a one of you. But what we are afraid of is implementation that isn't responsive to you as a professional learning what you need to learn to help your kids meet those standards. right? And so I often am struck with this question in schools, are we preparing kids for a lifetime of tests or for the tests of life? And I think the answer is both. You can surmise what you want from that. But the reality is all of our kids will be taking tests as adults in whatever form or fashion that we ask them to, right? So we have to think about how are we responsive to that? How are we preparing kids to be both successful in the test of life and for the tests that they will take in life, right? And so to that end, what I really want to talk about is this idea of innovation. We use the term very loosely. If you look at Webster's dictionary, you know, the definition is really not sufficient to me. It's like a new idea, device, or method. The act or process of introducing a new idea, device, or method. Blah, that can tell us anything. But what most schools have done is they've used this word to use it as the initiative of the day, to rally folks around the initiative of the day. We're going to be an innovative school district. We're going one-to-one laptops. Awesome, right? Like those are tools that kids need. But what is the point of putting a laptop in every kid's hand when the rest of your pedagogy still sucks? Or, better yet, you don't know what to do with the laptop because you haven't provided the training, right? So the thing is, guys, like I'm not saying we shouldn't use these tools, and everyone across the hall is probably offering some really great opportunities to bring some new resources and tools. This gentleman asked me, what did I mean by technology? I define technology very broadly as any tool that will help a kid learn, right? And if it's a device, great. But if it's a really kick-ass instructional strategy, that's technology to me too, right? What are the tools we're using to enable all of our kids to learn and to access the content? That to me is what technology is about. So I like to think of innovation sort of like this ball of clay, right? You can take that clay and you can reshape it in a lot of different forms, but it's still clay. And I feel this way about many schools that talk about innovation. We will bring in the new tool, we will bring in the new resource, you know, we'll have the technology learning day, great. But then we go back to the pedagogy that we do every other day in every other way, right? So this isn't an event. Innovation is not an event. It is a changing and a redefining of mindsets, right? So I think unless we can get this right in school, we should just get rid of the word innovation, because what we're really doing is we're just rearranging the chairs on the deck. We're just reforming the clay of what we've always been doing. So what I want to kind of push you to be thinking about is how do we really create new learning experiences for kids that they don't currently have, right? How do we really get kids out into the world to see the classroom as not just in our four walls, but in the world around them, right? To me, that's a little bit closer to what innovation can be. The other thing that I'm struck by is that most schools still do not have a definition of what success looks like, right? So, for example, I go to a lot of schools where teachers are working their fannies off. They're working really hard, but they're working hard in different directions. And I'm sorry, but this is a crisis in leadership. As leaders, it is incumbent upon us to help work with teachers to form a common vision of what success looks like, right? So if we can't leave this room and know that we have a common definition of what it is we want kids to know, do, and be as people when they leave us, then it doesn't matter what technology you bring in. It doesn't matter what newfangled things we're going to try. The end result will be the same because we're all working hard in different directions. All right, how many of you have a graduate profile that defines exactly what kids should be able to know, do, and be when they leave you as a school? Anybody? Ooh, I thought I would see at least one hand. Okay, so I'm going to charge you now to be thinking about this. Like, what are we working towards? Because here's the problem, folks. If we are defining success by test scores, by rankings, and by graduation rates, we are missing the boat. That is not the way we want to define success. And that's many high-performing countries around the world do not define success by that. They define it by things like joy. Interesting idea, right? The kids actually want to learn, that their curiosities are brought out in them. And so this is something that I think we need to be thinking about in terms of innovation. Because you see, every decision I make as a school leader or as a district leader should be grounded in this definition of success. You want to change master schedule? Great. How's it going to help us get to this? You want to add an elective? Great. How's it going to help us get to this? We need to make budget cuts? Not great. But if we have to do it, what are we going to be able to do to maintain a program that will get our kids here? If you're not grounded in what success means, then I'm not sure how we're making decisions. It's very arbitrary. So the thing I want to leave on this morning, so about 15, 16 minutes, is this idea of sort of like what does it mean to prepare our kids to be globally competent? And this is sort of the work that I've been doing primarily for the last 6 years. The work has preeminently been done by the organization I work for called Asia Society and another organization called CCSSO. This is a council of chief state school officers. These are sort of like all of your commissioners of education, state superintendents. And so they convened a group of sort of thought leaders, probably about 10 years ago now, to define what does it really mean for our kids to be globally competent when they leave us. So a couple things came out of that work. First of all, content knowledge does matter. Very often we talk about kids being global citizens or globally competent. People think it's a soft skill thing, right? But the reality is they actually need content knowledge to be able to apply it in meaningful ways. But the other thing that we know is that there are sort of 4 dispositions that we're trying to develop in students. The first is their ability to be able to investigate the world. In other words, how are we creating opportunities for kids to be able to answer engaging, thought-provoking questions that get them to think about the world around them? And in many cases, it's these questions that give the learning reason and relevance. You know, you've heard that your kids ask this question, why are we learning this? Okay. Well, how can we create relevance for them and so they understand why it is we're asking them? So this is where you have things like research, right, where they're trying to find out information, they're trying to figure out global issues and how they pertain to them at a local level, right? It's really engaging in these ways. The second is that we want them to be able to recognize perspectives, right? So every one of you today came sort of with your perspective. You see the world through a certain lens. Your experiences in life, the things you've done, your aspirations have all shaped that lens through which you see the world. And the reality is, if we don't understand our own lens, it's really hard to respect and understand the lens of others. I would argue there are many in the political landscape right now that are not recognizing perspectives. Okay, and so this is a really important disposition we want to develop in our kids. Now, it's not enough for them to investigate the world, to recognize those perspectives. We want them to actually do something with it. And this is where this notion of communicating ideas comes in. And then finally, the one that is my favorite, this idea that we want them to take action. You know, you've probably heard the phrase that we're preparing kids to be the leaders of tomorrow. Have you heard that? I hate that phrase. Right? We need them to be the leaders of today. Right? A lot of these problems we have in the society, if we as the adults could fix it, wouldn't we have done it by now? Right? So we need kids to be the actors on the world stage today to kind of bring their nubile thinking, their flexible thinking to these problems. So our job then as teachers is to think about how do we cultivate these 4 dispositions, where we're asking kids to investigate and be curious about the world, to recognize the different perspectives that people bring to these different issues, that they're communicating effectively, you know, using both traditional and contemporary forms. And again, I think for all of these things, technology plays a critical role. How many of you know, well, I'll just ask this question, how many of you have kids who have friends in other countries? Either your students or your own personal children. Okay? Guess what? You should probably all raise your hand because they have friends, whether you know it or not. If they are in any form of social media, they have relationships of some sort with someone from another part of the world. Now, whether they're appropriate relationships is a totally other question, okay? Now, the question is this, like, kids are going to be global with or without us. I'm just making the argument we want to be global with them so they can understand what it is that they're receiving. So as you kind of go through, I'm going to kind of skip ahead here. All right, as you think about how this might look in schools, and this is again, you know, you're probably wondering, like, oh, does he know this is a STEM conference? Yes, I know this is a STEM conference. So let me kind of demonstrate where this fits in. The subtle shift that I think a lot of schools can make is to think about the way in which they frame the learning. Right? So for example, if you decide that you're going to bring in globally significant issues into your curriculum, it automatically now connects the learning to the world around kids. Most global issues are also local issues. Okay, so things like poverty, unemployment, sustainability, you name it, there's likely a global and a local connection for kids to make. So if you're trying to, again, create this idea of relevance for students, one way to do that is to bring into these global issues into your curriculum. Another way to think about it is this heuristic, and this is something we developed when I was at the Asia Society, and this is very simple. But I want you to think about your curriculum, and to the extent you do these 4 things. The first one is around student choice. So to what extent in your curriculum do you allow students the opportunity to choose what they learn, how they learn it, and how they're going to demonstrate that learning. Okay, let me repeat that again. What they learn, how they learn it, and how they're going to demonstrate that learning. Right, so this comes back to the sort of the personalized learning piece. Right? Giving students choice in their learning automatically increases their motivation, right? And in some cases, it actually also, the research shows, increases their performance. Now, I'm not saying you give them unbounded choice, right? The reality is we can give them choice within a fixed curriculum. People say, well, we can't do that. We have a curriculum we have to teach. Engage New York. Okay, well, great. But like within that curriculum, how can we give them choice, right? And in terms of how they demonstrate that learning and how they talk about their work. And again, I want you, hopefully you can see in the back of your mind sort of the ways technology can play a role in all these. The second is that we're asking kids to do things that we would do as adults in the real world, that there's authentic context to that learning. Now, I don't know about any of you, but I've never been asked by my supervisor to build a shoebox diorama for my evaluation. Like, I don't know, have any of you been evaluated that way? Like, I missed that day, right? So then why would we ask kids to do that at the high school, right? And I've seen this, right? I've seen this. So the reality is, to what extent are our assessments mirroring the types of things kids will be expected to do in the real world, right? The third is this idea, again, that we're bringing in some sort of globally significant issue, that we're using global issues to frame the learning, give it purpose and relevance, right? And then lastly, that we're thinking about a way to exhibit their learning to a broader audience, right? We are shocked when kids do not come to school wanting to do their homework. Well, the question is, well, why would they? They're doing it for you, right? But as soon as now we can create an audience for them, whether it's just their classmates, the school at large, or the community, again, engagement goes up, interest level goes up. So even if you just made this subtle shift in your teaching and learning and thinking about how you can increase the opportunities for kids in these 4 ways, automatically now you're starting to mirror the type of learning that I'm guessing many of you talked about when you were sharing with your colleagues. Okay, the other piece is that, as teachers, we're really good at stealing stuff, right? And so in one of the sessions I'm going to do later today, we're going to actually dive into some of the strategies. So like today's talk this morning is kind of high level, kind of just getting to kind of provoke your thought a little bit. The 2 sessions I'm going to do after this, if you're sick of me already, those of you who want to join me, the next one's going to be like really specifically, what are the strategies and tools you can use in your school to globalize? And then the last session is going to be sort of on tech tools that I've been seeing teachers use to connect their students with the world. So those are very, very like specific. But here's just a couple for those of you who won't be joining me today. These are just some of the organizations that I think a lot of. I've worked with many of these organizations. And the point is this, you don't need to recreate the wheel. There are a lot of great project ideas. There are great resources. There are great ways for you to be able to connect your students to the world. One of them that I'm going to talk about in my session this afternoon is called Global Nomads Group. They're doing some really awesome work right now around virtual learning, right? Where you actually put the goggles on, you put the headphones on, and they've created some learning experiences. One that they're doing right now is where you're basically walking into the streets of Syria. And you're experiencing what it would be like to walk down the streets of Syria when an explosion goes off and your life is changed. Right? Now think about that for a second. I get chills just thinking about it. But if I am a high school student and I experience that, what does that make me think about? What does that bring out in me in terms of empathy and understanding? And then they go down the hall and they have to write the book report again. Right? Think about that for a second, right? You're in a classroom where you're experiencing that. There's all this emotion, all this thinking, all these questions. And then you go down the hall to another classroom and you're being asked to do the same things you've always done or follow the script you've put down. Right? Kids are great code switchers because of this, right? So I encourage you to check out these organizations because almost everything that I'm showing up here is free. I can't stress that enough. And it's been vetted and it's good stuff. And so I encourage you to think about it. So why recreate the wheel, right? There's a lot of things you can use that are ready to go. Now, the other thing I want to kind of finish on here is this idea of like who's in the driver's seat. And so as you're going through the sessions today, I want you to be asking this kind of critical question is like, to what extent are the things I'm learning about in this session, or the tools that the guys over here are showing you, to what extent do they put students at the center of learning? Right? Because I still go into too many classrooms around this country where most of the talking is the teacher. Most of the learning is directed by the adults, right? And I know you all went to college, it's cool. you're very knowledgeable, but the reality is we want the kids to be the ones doing it. So there's one group I want to share with you. It's called Student Voice. This is a group of high school and college students who took to Twitter. They started on Twitter. And so that on Monday nights, they would go on Twitter and they would start like debating different issues about education. Well, 3 years later now, this is a group of still high school and college students that have created a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and they're actively advocating for more student voice at the table. This means having students on their school boards. This means having students participate in curriculum writing. Okay, anybody here have students on your curriculum writing teams? No? Why not? Okay. How many of you, have a sitting student member on all your building committees? Okay, a couple, 1 or 2 hands, that's better, right? So the point is they are the audience that we're trying to, they know best what happens in our schools. And yet we don't ask them. We don't ask them what their experience is. In some cases, I don't know if we don't care or what, but they have really good insight. So I encourage you to check them out for those of you who are on Twitter. Student Voice, the hashtag is StuVoice. They have a chat tonight, actually. The other thing that they've created is something called the Student Bill of Rights, which is really fascinating. So this is a set of rights that they have kind of developed that they think every student would have access to. And so they're actually looking for schools right now that want to work with them, won't cost you anything, to help develop a curriculum or weave these rights into a curriculum that already exists. So if you're interested in that, come find me on the break and I can connect you with them. But again, I can't stress this enough. These are high school and college students, right, that are going to school and working on running a nonprofit that are really trying to promote this. This is the type of behavior. This is the type of citizen we want to create in our schools. All right, so we have a hard stop, Michelle, at quarter of. Yeah, okay. So, okay. So I'm not going to do this one. I want you to think about this, though. Here's an activity. If we had time, I was going to do this. Okay. So I was going to ask you to stand up. I was going to ask you to decide whether you are more like a spoon or a fork. And I want you to show me. Actually, just let's do this part at least. Show me, are you more like a fork or a spoon? Come on, don't be shy. More like a spoon or more like a fork?
I'm a sport.
You cannot be a sport. Wow, we're in trouble. All right, so the way this works is, you would stand up and we would say, okay, are you more like a fork or more like a spoon? And then we get you in pairs. So a fork has to match with a spoon, all right? And then you find another pair. So you're gonna be in a group of 4. And what I was hoping we'd have time to do is something I call 1-minute life story. So the idea is that in 1 minute, you would tell your life story, what it is that you, everything about yourself in 1 minute, right? You'd be surprised how many people get done at 30 seconds. I'm like, come on, keep going, keep going. And the point of this activity, again, is that every one of us has a story, right? And what's interesting to me always is what people choose to talk about in that minute, right? And so the idea is that our kids every day are writing their life story. And you are a critical part of helping them write that story. And we can help them write it in a very positive way, or unknowingly sometimes we can short circuit that story if we're not careful. Right? And so the idea increasingly across this country and abroad is this idea of how do we personalize the learning, where every single student has ownership of their learning pathway. Right? They have an individual learning plan, if you will, every single student. So one example of this is a school that I'm working with in Denver called the Denver School of Innovation and Sustainable Design, DSISD for short. I did not like this name, but that's okay. They wanted it. So what they've done is this is a completely personalized high school. What that means is that every single student has an individualized learning plan. Okay? They are ungraded, meaning there will be no grade levels in the school. Kids will progress at their own pace. And there's a set of competencies that students have to demonstrate mastery of. Okay? And so what they've done is they've taken the standards, they've kind of broken down the standards into a set of competencies, and then they have divided them and sort of sorted them in both academic and sort of non-cognitive, non-academic competencies. So they've gotten very clear about what success looks like and what it's going to look like, right, and how we're going to assess it. So every single student goes through what's called a playlist. So some of this is online, some of this is offline, some of it is through project-based learning. But the idea is that every single student is responsible for keeping track of how they're going to demonstrate mastery of those competencies And once they have been able to demonstrate that, they move on to the next set. So that if it takes me a little bit longer than someone else in the room, that's okay. And as a school, we will surround you with the supports that you need to be successful. If I'm ready to accelerate, I have the ability to accelerate. We're seeing more examples of this both here in the United States and abroad. And actually where it's really starting to take off is at the university level, right? There's an organization called Minerva Schools, which is a very personalized program, small cohorts of students, anytime, anywhere learning, right? And the idea is that kids are learning with or without us, right? They're learning all around us. But how do we give them credit for that learning? So in this school, seat time is not the rule. Time is the variable. And what I mean by that is it's not about you're in this classroom for this number of minutes this week. And course credits are not tied to completing a course. They're tied to demonstrating mastery. Very different concept. And where we're doing this work is in urban communities, right? So when people say, well, that wouldn't work here. Well, guess what? We're doing it in Cleveland. We're doing it in Denver. We're doing it in New York City, where many students are very disadvantaged. And because of this flexible learning environment, and because of the use of technology to allow learning to happen anywhere, anytime, more and more students are able to demonstrate that they actually know content and they can demonstrate mastery, because when it was tied to seat time, it wasn't working for them. Okay, so two final thoughts. And, so I apologize if I've kind of jumped around a little bit today, but I wanted to kind of raise a couple big ideas for you that now hopefully in the breakout sessions are going to start to be unearthed a little bit. Again, the first is this idea that innovation. If we are just bringing in tools for tools' sake, and it's not changing the pedagogy, and it's not changing the learning objectives for students, and it's not connecting them to the world, then I would argue that the tool is not worth buying. And that's number one, right? Fundamentally, how do we change the way we engage kids and connect them to the world? That should be the question. Second, if we are not connecting our kids to the world, we are not bringing in global issues. We are not promoting their understanding of themselves in the context of the larger world. We are not preparing them for 2028, right? So to the extent possible, how do these tools you're going to look at in the next couple of sessions help develop those skills and dispositions to investigate the world, recognize perspectives, communicate ideas, and take action, right? If these tools can help your students do those things, then I'd argue they're probably more worth it. And then the last one, again, is this idea that how do we think about personalizing the learning so that students are in the driver's seat, right? So that they get what they need, when they need it, and how they need it. So the two thoughts then is number one, so this is not magic, but it does require a plan. So again, if you're working in a school or a district that does not have a strategic plan, that does not have clear outcomes, that does not have a clear definition of what success looks like, then it's incumbent upon us to ask for that, to demand that. Otherwise, we're going to keep working hard in different directions. And the last one that I always think about is regardless of what the tool is, at the end of the day, this job is still all about relationships, right? It's all about relationships. And so if we can foster those relationships, teacher to teacher, student to teacher, student to student, student to the world, the reality is they're not only going to be more engaged, they're going to be more successful both long and short term. They will be prepared for a lifetime of tests, but more importantly for the tests of life. So I'm excited to uncover some more of this with you this morning. I know some of you will be going to other sessions, but if you're with me, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of how to do that. I just want to wish you a great day, and thank you again for having me here today.